welcome everybody. I'm Malcolm Thomas, President of INCOSE UK, and today we've got a presentation masterclass given by Laura Shrieves of Thales, which I'm sure you're going to enjoy. For those of you that are lucky enough to be presenting your papers at our ASEC in November, just a reminder that it's taking place in Liverpool at Spaces at the Spine between the 21st and 22nd of November. And a few little things that we need to sort of remind you about, that you'll get a time slot and you'll know when that is. You have to submit your presentation to the OneDrive, that's the INCOSE UK OneDrive, by the 3rd of November. And you need to have addressed all the presentation guidelines, like putting your copyright statement on each of the slides. So that's not too difficult. So do that before then. And on the day when we get to your time slot, or just before, introduce yourself to the council member who will be leading the slot. And do that in the break before your presentation, so you can be fitted up with a microphone and everything like that. So the council member will then introduce you along with your paper, with your bio, and then once you're going, just enjoy yourself. It's as easy as that. And then if you have any questions, please address those to the events team at that address there, events@incoseuk.org. So, right, I will stop sharing and I will let Laura take over, and she will now present her presentation masterclass.
Thank you very much. Right, so good afternoon, everyone. For those of you who haven't met before, my name's Laura Shrieves. I'm Engineering Director for Thales GTS, which is Ground Transportation Systems. And I used to be very heavily involved with INCOSE, less so now. Life has taken over. I've got a couple of little kids, but I have noticed that once you volunteer for something, especially with John Holt, you know, those requests do come through fairly often. I was going to sort of do a bit of a around the table, but since there's so many of you, I think it might be easier just to use the chat. Could you just please put in sort of who you are and why you're here, and then we can sort of adapt the conversation as we go, and then I'll sort of pick out some highlights. Thanks, Hazel. You are relatively experienced in presenting. Absolutely. I've seen you present a number of times, Hazel. Hi, Jack. So you're going to be presenting your technical paper. Brilliant. Lucas also presenting for professional development to improve presentation skills, generally in meetings. Yep, good one. To learn techniques, improve presentations, gain confidence. Here to learn a few tips and tricks. Brilliant. I actually have a slide called tips, so hints and tips. Mark, going to Liverpool the first time, you've got the graveyard shift. Well, Mark, my first ASEC presentation, I was trying to think, was it 2014 or 2015? And I did day 2 after lunch. So not only was it the second day, so everybody was a little bit tired, they'd also eaten a lot of food, and I was petrified at points. I would say I drank purely apple juice the night before, and yeah, really went with my presentation. Right, what do I want to say? What do I want to say? What do I want to say? That was a number of years ago. I've learned to sort of change my approach since then, and I'll be sharing some of that. Andrew, not presenting, but here for any tips. Oh, everybody's keeps moving. Carl, CPD, Dan. Presenting to your own business. Yep, I have a fair amount of experience in that. Is that Howie Chow? I don't know if I'm saying that right. But looking to improve your presentation skills, particularly in storytelling. Very interesting. Is a topic we're going to be covering. And Joseph, looking for some tips. Absolutely brilliant. Right. Okay, so What makes a good presentation? You can either come off mute or put something in the chat. What do you all reckon? So in order to answer this, I used my my wonderful friend ChatGPT, and then I sort of balanced that out against Bard and my own thoughts as well. So we got two-way interaction, enthusiastic speaker, absolutely content needs to be engaging. So this is some of the contents that, as I say, me, ChatGPT and Bard came up with. Clear, really clear what your messaging should be. Engaging, yep, we absolutely have that one there. Some humour, absolutely. Thought-provoking. Confident in your delivery. Clarity. Could be, you know, very, very many different ways of saying things. Having a good structure as well. Good use of images. No obvious errors, especially I have noticed when you're presenting to systems engineers. People will pick out all very minor errors. Multiple channels, good one, Hazel. Audio and visual. Having something a bit more interactive. And then takeaways or actions for the audience. Bit of creativity and storytelling, as we mentioned before. Any other things that anybody would like to add over and above that list? So you can either come off mute, pop it in the chat.
I found props to be quite good with presenting, but maybe that comes down with the interactivity.
Nice. Could you give us a good example of using a prop?
Yes, it's just when explaining the concept, it's fairly. It helps if you have something holding your hands, you can pass around the audience, but maybe less so in a big audience like the one at ASEC.
Yeah, so something tangible, so that people can, yeah, it can make it something become much more alive, can't it? I think in sort of product or sales, it's absolutely, it's finding the right prop, I think, for the right presentation. Body language and eye contact, absolutely. Right. Any more for any more before I move on? Okay. Right. It's one of my favorite quotes. Double points if anyone can name who said this. But people will forget what you said. People forget what you did, but people would never forget how you made them feel. Some people don't think that that is maybe sort of the right, you know, that sort of TED Talk style, but absolutely people really remember how you made them feel, even if it's a technical presentation. You know, it's that what is somebody going to take away from that, which is why I think it's such an important quote when it comes to presentations. Any guesses or anybody know who said that? I actually forgot to quote this person, so I will update these before I send these slides through. Okay, that was Maya Angelou. Right, next part, I'd like a little bit more interactivity here. What's your view on sort of use of data and charts? And does it work? Anybody like to start?
I think if the data are clear, or if the charts are clear and readable, and you can explain them in a few words, then to spend half an hour on explaining one chart, then I think it works.
Okay. Thank you, Lucas. Anybody else?
I think the message has to be clear from the chart, and it has to be really simple, and not too many tiny letters and characters so people can't make out what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. Otherwise they spend the entire time trying to read the slide, don't they, Hazel, rather than actually the message that you're trying to convey. So a hint and tip for you here. Normally I try and count to 10 once I get sort of the muted silence, just enough to make it slightly uncomfortable, and then we move on. So you find McKinsey's charts really engaging, their use of colour, and have a key takeaway sentence right next to it. I think that's really important, Harry, having that key takeaway. It goes back to the my shared experience at the start. I started with me and what I wanted to stay, rather than the other way around, which is the audience and what do I need them to go away thinking, feeling, and doing. Right, storytelling. I think this was brought up by you, Howie, and how storytelling affects the brain. But essentially, I think the most important point is the bottom left hand. They are two areas of the brain that are activated when processing facts. Stories activate many additional areas of the brain, such as motor cortex, sensory cortex, and frontal cortex. Also, dopamine is released when you're listening to a story. You know, you get that feel-good chemical. And also cortisol. So if you're talking about a story and, you know, it's got some sort of conflict in it, people actually pay more attention and therefore they remember more. So it goes back to that point about what do you really want people to come away from your presentation thinking, feeling, and doing. Any comments on questions on this slide? I quite like it as a slide. I think there's a lot of information there, but it's a good use of a visual. But you're all counting to 10 now. I shared that with you.
I was desperately trying to unmute. There's quite a lot of words on there.
There is a lot of words on there. And what I've tried to do with this presentation is show you some different examples of the combination of images, words, lots of words, just images. And what I would like you to do is post this presentation, reflect on what do you think has been, you know, what did you really take away from it? Was it when I had loads of words on there? Was it when I had loads of pictures on there? Was it when I had a combination? Was it when I just had a quote, just a simple quote? Right. So next slide, just a few tips for business stories. And actually one of my leadership team in Thales put most of this together for something that's storytelling. So I thought rather than recreate it, I would just reuse it. So stories, they should be true. From your own life or someone else's. You really want that sort of authenticity, and you really want to sort of name that character as well. They shouldn't be too long as well, so ideal time 30 to 90 seconds, and that times where you felt a strong emotion. If I go back to that sort of brain picture, you really want to light up those different areas of the brain. Make sure that people are paying attention, that they're sort of drawn in to you. Really think about what you want your audience to feel. Do you need them to feel trust? Do you want to build rapport? Do you want them to be curious? And it doesn't have to be one story for one lesson. And the point, you know, that I made the mistake with my first presentation, it's not about you. It's about your audience. How do you want them to feel? What do you want them to be going away doing? So there are a few steps to a story. You can't just sort of go, oh, I'm going to tell you a story. You sort of have to create that rapport first, and then you transition into your story. Again, don't say, I'm now going into a story. Just be natural with it, and then sort of transition back out again. So if I use my example, I introduced myself to everybody. We did a sort of little bit about who you are and why you're here. And then I shared my experience, which was a story in itself, about my first time presenting at INCOSE. And then we sort of carried on with the material. So that is an example, I would say, of a bit of rapport, transitioning, telling the story, and then transitioning back out again. So now I've shared all of that with you. I would like everybody to spend 5 minutes. So we're at 20 past. So until 25 past, creating your own story. So I want you to have a look at setting your intention. What do you want the audience to feel? It should be true, but again, it doesn't necessarily have to be about you. It should be a motive, and then that sort of period of 30 to 90 seconds long. Do you have any questions before everybody cracks on with this? And don't worry, you're not all going to be asked to share it. I might ask a couple of people. I'm going to do my own, and then we can sort of discuss how impactful we think they've been. All right, I'm going to crack on with my own now. So we've got until 25 past. Okay, so that's about time. Would anybody like to share their story? I'm happy to start to get the ball rolling. So mine is about trying to get my son down for bed. So he's 4. He's just started school. And he got up not once, not twice, but 8 times last night. 8 times. And we got into this sort of vicious circle of him getting up, me getting angry, him then being angry, and then him getting up. And, you know, we were just going in this vicious circle. After the 8th time, I figured it wasn't working. So I took a deep breath, slowed down, was very calm. And instead of going back in there the 8th time, just asking him why, because he clearly did not know, actually just spending a few minutes with him, just helping him become calm and taking that deep breath and slowing down. And it worked. So I would think my lesson from that is that, yeah, sometimes you just have to slow down. So this for me would be a good example of a little story where I'm trying to do a presentation where, you know, we've got a lot of information, but actually, you know, be a great one to sort of segue into a bit of systems thinking. Actually, we need to take a pause, take a step back. Let's have a look at the bigger picture. So that's my example. As I say, happened last night 8 times. Hoping it's not going to happen tonight, but we shall see. Anybody else want to go next?
I'm happy to share, Laura, if that's okay.
Thank you very much, Hazel.
So it's one from a long time ago, far, far away. I was presenting to a client. We had a half-day training session to do, and I had a wonderful mentor at the time who was helping me, and we were co-presenting. I think terrified is probably the right word. Very, very nervous about it, not at all sure of myself. I knew the content, I knew what I was talking about, but I was just not happy with standing up in front of people at that stage. So she gave me the most practical presentation advice I have ever had, and I do pass it on at every opportunity. So apologise for anybody who knows me who's probably heard it before. She said, going to the ladies. It's one advantage of being a woman in engineering, that in an engineering environment, you can go into the ladies
Empty,
and it is deserted. Go into the ladies, she said, and shake like a dog. So from the tip of your nose right down to your feet, shake just like a dog does. So imagine a wet dog shaking. That's what she told me to do. And it was such an impressive exercise because it totally relaxed me, because you have to move every muscle in your body. You have to kind of let go and relax. You can't be tense and shake like a dog. So it really helped me. I came out of there much happier, slightly dizzy, but much happier, and went on to present reasonably comfortably. And as I say, I share that with anybody and everybody. And under times of extreme duress, I do still do it.
That's amazing. I love that, Hazel. I can't believe I've known you all these years and I didn't know that.
Can't believe I haven't told you.
I know. I am totally going to try that next time I've got a little bit of the nerves. I'm going to go into the ladies and shake like a dog. Fantastic. Thank you. Would anybody else like to share?
Yeah, I'm happy to.
Thank you. Are you Douglas Craig or Craig Douglas?
Douglas Craig.
Douglas Craig. As Mr. Holt would say, first, you've got a name with 2 first names.
Yeah, well, that's not how I see it, but there we are. I don't hold with this Craig fashion as a first name. It's not right. Anyway, so I was sitting in the main forum of last year's INCOSE conference, listening to a presentation, and it was by one of the big consultancies, and then people started asking questions afterwards, and they were kind of criticizing some of the diagrams, and they're not proper systems engineering diagrams. What's this all about? And I had a sudden realization, really, that we sit there in that room and we talk to each other using our jargon, but if we're trying to connect to other people who are not systems engineers, we have to move outside that bubble, and we have to find a way to cross that boundary. And the presentation was really about that, about how to connect to their other stakeholders. And this little light went on, and I thought, yeah, that's what we need to be doing. It's no good selling our stuff to ourselves, preaching to the choir. We need to find ways to communicate with others who don't understand what doesn't seem like jargon to us, but is to them. And that formed the basis of the presentation I've put together for possibly for this year's conference. It's a reserved presentation, and a number of strands just came together and clicked at that point.
Amazing. I would be interested in that because I don't do systems engineering in the traditional sense, but anybody who works with me knows that, once you're a systems engineer, that's it. You're a systems engineer for life, aren't you? So I actually use that systems engineering approaches, I would say, for organizational development or, many, many other things. So yeah, I'd be quite interested in that, Douglas. Thank you. And thank you for sharing your story.
Pleasure.
Anyone else?
I can give it a go.
Yeah, go for it.
Hi everyone.
Is that Daniel?
Yes, I'm Dan. I go by Dan. I'm a nickname kind of guy. Yeah, so mine's nothing to do with work. So I'm a tuba player in a brass band. It's probably my main passion. I've done for years now. And sort of coming to the mouth, why the mouth is so important. I was experiencing pain in my back left molar for quite some time, like about 2 years. But me being my typical teenager, I sort of paid no attention to it. I was like, I brush my teeth. I think I'm clean. There's nothing wrong with it. But my partner actually moved jobs into a dental practice, and she got me an appointment to check it out, and actually turned out that my wisdom tooth was growing in sideways and had impacted my tooth under the gum. So it was something I'd never see, but that was why I was getting all that pain. And effectively I got it taken out because it was decaying and it was dying by near the nerve. And now I'm so much better. So I mean, I think my kind of takeaway from that is even if you think you're clean and you got good oral hygiene, there's always something that could be wrong. So always go to the dentist and check it out.
Great. I love that. Lessons for life there, Dan. And having had I had an impacted wisdom tooth myself many years ago. I remember the pain. So when you were talking about it, I was sort of starting to feel it as well.
Yeah.
So you get that sort of level of connection.
The weird thing about it was like I could eat food normally. So like, normal hard food was absolutely fine, but it was whenever I'd have a cold drink or a hot drink, and it would just, to be honest, it wasn't even a bad pain. It was just like a noticeable pain. I was like, that doesn't feel right. But that was why I kind of just put it off for 2 years. But, yeah.
Lesson learned.
Yeah.
Good sharing. Thank you, Dan. Okay, so we had 4 stories there, all very different stories. I'd like you to just spend a few moments reflecting on those stories that you've heard. What did you feel when you listened to that? What really sort of landed? What made you connect with that story? Is there anything you think could be improved in those stories? Have a couple of minutes to have a think about it, and then if you could pop some reflections in the chat. So the parts of the stories where there was an emotional connection or response, yeah, brilliant one. And all stories ended with a call to action in some form. Yeah, so it's great to have the story there, isn't there? But it's understanding what that broader purpose for me. And I connected with all three of those stories in very different ways, probably because, you know, with Hazel, I know Hazel, we've known each other for a long time. I was almost starting to shake when Hazel was describing it, which I thought was great. I think Douglas's, when you did your sort of, you said you had that sort of light bulb moment. I was, you know, almost picturing, I don't know what you look, but I was picturing, all right, okay, yeah, someone's got that sort of spark of inspiration. And then Dan's, as I say, I almost felt that in my teeth when you were talking. Oh yeah, and the stories were relatable. Absolutely, they were just about anything. And I think that's the important thing about stories. They don't need to be specifically, right, I'm doing a technical presentation, therefore I can only tell stories that are about a technical presentation. It's the lessons of the stories and how you can then impact that presentation. Tone and pace, yeah. Hear someone explaining with enthusiasm and confidence in what they're saying. Yep, goes right back to those points from ChatGPT at the start. I think there's an element of belief in there, isn't there? Really enthusiastic, really confident. So you can then believe in what they're saying. Any last comments? So feel free to come off mute. Okay, right. So last slide, just a couple of hints and tips. So really think about your audience. As I mentioned, I used to do presentations from my perspective, you know, what I wanted to say, rather than put myself into the mindset of the audiences. What do I need? You know, what do they want to hear? What do they need to be going away, thinking about, feeling, doing? So I'd start with your audience. And about what you want to achieve. Is your presentation to share knowledge, to influence, to inspire? They'll all of these different things, we all have a very different structure and content in that. And then this is just a personal one from me. I find if I start with slides, I always end up going down the text heavy route. If I start, I always now start with a OneNote, right? With my, you know, with my audience. What do I want this presentation to achieve? Write a few things down and then go away and do many other things. And then it's always in the back of my head, right? Okay, I've got this presentation coming up. What do I want this to achieve? And then actually the slides almost write themselves rather than starting with the slides, normally text heavy, and then having to refine loads. So my final takeaway from you is think about what you've just heard. How much do you remember about the words or the pictures? And how much do you remember about both the story I told at the start and those 4 fantastic stories that you heard from people just thinking and creating in that storytelling space? I know for me, thank you, Hazel, Dan, and Douglas. Those are the things that I'm going to be taking away from this session, is those fantastic stories that you created and shared with me. Okay, that is the all of the content that I have. So I am happy to take any questions or comments or feedback that anybody has.
I've got a question.
Go for it, Hazel.
So somebody put, when you said what makes a good presentation, somebody put eye contact in there. And talking one-to-one with somebody, I understand intellectually that eye contact is possible, however difficult it may be. Talking to a group of 10, 20, 100 people at a conference, you can't maintain eye contact with every one of the 100 in the audience, obviously, but have you got any hints and tips on how best to manage the whole eye contact thing?
Yeah, you're right. It's not just number, I would say. It's also venue. So, you know, if you've got a large, expansive space that you can move around and you can connect with a different number of people, or if you've got a very small stage and you're stuck behind a podium, then it's very, very difficult. So I would say it's really number of people and venue dependent. So I am not a fan of standing behind a podium. Yes, it gives you a safe space and you've got all your notes and everything there, but actually there's almost a barrier between you and the rest of the audience. Whereas actually, if you can be sort of, you know, a bit more natural walking around, then you can connect with lots of people. But you've really got to judge, haven't you? If you've got 100 people, there's no way you can have eye contact with all 100, but you could then pick out a few people. And it's all about that, making that connection, isn't it? And you'll notice, and I definitely notice when I present to people, you get sort of the people who are sort of really engaged, and you get that feedback and you get that nods. I am much more drawn to those people, and giving those people the eye contact, because they sort of then you can tell you've got that connection, rather than the people are sort of looking down very much at their phones. And then you've got the people who are a little bit more neutral. So I think it's really judging the number of people, and also the space that you're in. And as I say, the bit about the podiums for me, I much prefer a roving, clip-on mic, and can walk around. Or if the space is, I don't have to have a mic, I've got a pretty loud voice when I need to. So moving about. And as you can see, I still do this quite a lot with my hands as well, so I have to hold them sometimes, otherwise it gets a bit too enthusiastic. But yeah, it's really dependent, I would say, Hazel. You've got to get that right balance, haven't you? So I'd say in an audience of 100, there's probably 5 to 10 over the course of a INCOSE presentations are still what, half an hour ish? Yeah, that you could sort of make a sort of meaningful connection with, but it's about using that space as well for me.
Thank you. Thanks,
Hazel. Always rely on Hazel to ask a good question. Any more? You can pop it in the chat, or if you think of something between now and when you're doing your presentation, I'm on LinkedIn, send me a message. I will do my best to answer.
I've got one. I'm not sure if it's a great question, but something I've heard is that to keep your audience engaged is to kind of get a bit of audience participation. When you've got kind of like a big room, like when you're talking like about 80 to like 100 kind of people, obviously I think just obviously to speed things along, you don't kind of want to ask them a question and wait for the response, because you might be stood there for quite a while. In your kind of experience, what kind of some other kind of techniques to try and get kind of like that audience participation kind of going, like kind of like a show of hands, or like do like a poll, or
I think it depends on the topic of your presentation, again, your space, but I quite like a yes no. Make sure people are paying attention, hands up. Or sometimes, again, had the graveyard shift, second day post lunch, rather than yes no, get people to stand up for yes, sit down for no. That could work. I've done that before when I needed to inject a little bit of energy into the room. Or if you do want some questions, there is absolutely nothing wrong with speaking to somebody up front. I mean, I've got Hazel here. You know, I know she's always going to ask a good question. You know, just say to somebody, look, I really appreciate it. Don't tell them the question to ask, but I'd really appreciate if you could get the ball rolling when it comes to questions, sort of thing. And because normally once you've got the first person, everybody else then has that confidence to go, oh, okay, I'll ask mine. But just getting that first one, I think is really important. So if I don't think I'm going to get as much interaction, I normally do sort of go to my go-to question people and say, right, can you ask the first question? Just, you know, may ease the sort of the rest of the audience into asking further questions.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. Any more for any more? Okay, Malcolm, I think we are done.
Yes, well, thank you very much, Laura. That was fascinating, particularly the stories. I enjoyed all of those. So thanks to those that contributed there. You had an easy one if you were just after lunch. My first one was the last one on day 2.
Yeah,
when most people have gone home. So, yes, it can be difficult. But yeah, some great tips there for people to use, not just at ASEC, but anywhere where they're giving presentations. I thought it was really brilliant. So with that, thank you, and we'll bring to a close.